Yeah, so I'm Andy Boulding. I'm a research associate at Global Canopy. And the people on the panel are going to be quite happy to hear that I'm talking about a bit more in detail the challenges and opportunities that organizations are going to face in terms of actually reporting on their nature-related risks. And specifically, I'm going to be talking about a project called the TNFD Aligned Soy Pilot. And I'll be joined by Daan, Schipper, who's joining online at a later stage just to give a bit of insight to his experiences in kind of this process of actually assessing, measuring and disclosing nature-related risks. So I'm going to try the thing here. So in terms of the session today, you've had the panel discussion on TNFD, so you're getting a bit of an overview of what it actually is. We've also heard over the last couple of days some really positive nature-related commitments being announced. So yeah, what are the main challenges and opportunities for organizations who are actually going through the process, non-financial companies, financial institutions, on actually reporting their nature-related risks? So I'll start by just providing a really quick overview to the TNFD, talk about the project, what it is, what it aims to achieve, then start highlighting some of the initial lessons we've learned coming back from the organizations involved, participating in the project. We'll hear from Daan, Schipper, who is the head of SDG transitions at Rabobank, on their experience through the project, and then talk a bit about next steps. So next steps with the research project specifically, and also just highlighting what Tony said, some ways that organizations can get involved in the TNFD going forward. And then might open it for, very briefly, considering the time, one or two questions at the end. So we've heard about it. What is the TNFD? Global market-led initiative, which is aiming to deliver a nature-related risk management and disclosure framework. And as Tony said in the previous panel discussion, really kind of following a develop, test, adjust approach. So developing materials with TNFD concepts, maybe some suggested disclosures, some guidance, sending those out to non-financial companies, financial institutions, NGOs, getting the feedback from them, and reiterating the documents to hopefully by 2023 getting to this final official TNFD framework. The two organizations who are leading on this project are Global Canopy and the United Nations Environment Programme Finance Initiative, and as we heard in the earlier panel discussion, these are two of the organizations that were the founding partners, two of the founding partners of the TNFD, and is why we're involved in this particular project. So the TNFD can broadly be split into 6 different phases: a prepare phase, a build phase, test phase, consult phase, disseminate phase, and uptake phase. So we've gone through the prepare phase, where there's been the announcement of co-chairs, the launch of the TNFD itself, and establishment of informal working group. We're currently in the build phase, so to Tony's point again, talking about this beta version of the framework. This is something that's being done in the build phase, and this is kind of where the soy aligned pilot project sits. So really informing that beta version of the framework, the lessons that we learned from here, and then also lessons taken forward to wider testing. There'll be much more testing going on, much more research going on. We don't have all the answers to the questions, and that is part of what we'll be doing for the next few years, trying to answer some of those questions and build the framework itself. There'll be wider consultation, and then there will obviously be the dissemination of the framework and uptake by market players. So the soy pilot, what is it? It is effectively a project where we've developed an exploratory nature-related risk framework, and we're testing that with organizations who either invest in or work within soy supply chains. So the likes of banks, asset managers, from the financial institution side, and then kind of food retail organizations, soy traders, food manufacturers, from the kind of non-financial company side. In terms of the number of organizations that we have participating, we've got 7 organizations participating in the project, 4 non-financial companies and 3 financial institutions. the main objectives of the project are really to kind of assess the readiness of these organisations to report, assess, measure and report on their nature-related risks. And this is following TNFD concepts and guidance that was listed in TNFD Proposed Technical Scope, which was released in June 2021. And that the outputs, we're hoping, will provide some really good practical lessons for future testing and to help inform the formal framework development process as well. So we're going out with this exploratory framework. What are the three main objectives that we're trying to achieve? Effectively, we're trying to assess the coherence of different TNFD concepts, definitions, guidance that are listed in the TNFD Proposed Technical Scope, get a better understanding of the available data for actually assessing, measuring and disclosing nature-related risks. And then finally, just quite an over-encompassing one, we are just looking at the challenges and opportunities that organisations face in kind of aligning with the TNFD and reporting on their nature-related risks. The framework itself is split into 3 different steps. So we have an assess step, a measure and disclose step, and an act step. In the assess step, this is really about organisations, reporting entities, identifying what the priorities are for their organisation. The measure and disclose step is really about the actual process of measuring and disclosing the nature-related risks in line with the 4 core pillars that are in the TCFD, so governance, risk management, strategy, and metrics and targets. And then finally, an act step is really that process of identifying and undertaking nature-positive actions for the organisations who are involved. Tony said it in his panel. Again, we're not trying to create something completely new. We are trying to draw on all the nature-related frameworks that are already out there and outputs that are already out there in this space. And we've used those to help inform the exploratory framework that's been used in this project. So I've talked a little bit about TNFD concepts. Within the TNFD Proposed Technical Scope, there are a number of different concepts which will require testing over the coming years. I just thought I'd list 3 of them that we've looked into within this project. So there's this idea of prioritisation. I've talked about the assess step, but organisations who are disclosing information in line with the TNFD, there is this concept of really prioritising those sectors, sub-industries that have the most significant impacts and dependencies on nature. So identifying those in the first phase, and then within these, what are the priority nature-related risks for the organisations who are involved. The second is this concept of nature-related risk, which really extends beyond the short-term financial risk, but is also about the long-term risks that are represented by an organisation's impacts and dependencies on nature. And we've talked, there were early discussions about it, but this is also including the kind of social considerations that are linked to an organisation's activities as well, so having to report on those. And then finally, there's this idea of data stacks. So when an organisation is disclosing information, they're providing information on the state of nature, which is really the contextual information to understand why a particular thing is a problem. The pressure on nature, which is an organisation's specific impacts and dependencies on nature. And finally, the response to nature, so what the organisation is doing in order to address their impacts and dependencies. So in terms of lessons learned so far, the project is kind of halfway through. We're still gathering lessons from the participants who are involved. But when it comes to this idea of prioritisation, we recognise that this is challenging. I think this is something that came back from the participants as well, is that a really, really comprehensive definition of nature and wide scope at early stages of the TNFD, risk being unmanageable. So really focusing in on the priority nature-related topics. 2 that were most commonly mentioned by the organisations who are involved were biodiversity and water, and less commonly soil and waste. So really focusing, making sure that we address those nature-related topics, understand them, can start reporting by geography, the spatial information, and then moving on and increasing the scope of nature and what's reported. I think there was also a recognition from the financial institutions and non-financial companies who are involved that there's a massive role that civil society and research organisations can play. So the idea of needing to prioritize, suggesting the financial institutions and non-financial companies who are involved suggested that they really need help to understand which areas to focus on. So we recognize that there are certain sectors, and obviously we're looking at the soy supply chain, that have significant impacts and dependencies on nature. But these organizations are really asking for help in this space and trying to understand where they should be focusing. And I think this really ties into this concept of state of nature data. So understanding the contextual information as to why something is a problem. There is the massive role that NGOs, civil society, research organizations can have in helping identify why particular things are a problem, so that these organizations can go away, work out these impacts and dependencies, and then use that information to provide that bigger picture.
Andrew, could you move closer to the mic?
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Online.
Yeah, sorry. So secondly, we're talking about nature-related risks. This idea of extending beyond short-term financial risks and looking also at the longer-term risks linked to an organization's impacts and dependencies. Something that's come back so far is a recognition that I think long-term risks for organizations could be more difficult than short-term risks to report on, and potentially subject, depending on the data, to greater uncertainty. So I think there is really a desire for more guidance in this particular space, how to identify longer-term risks. And I think this also comes into really difficulties for organizations who are participating in understanding their dependencies and how to translate them into nature-related risks. The second was the notion that actually for organizations participating, translating risks into financial terms is often very difficult. Obviously, nature-related risks and reporting on them is quite new, so I think there would also be the need for much more guidance in this area, and also ensuring that any guidance is using a common language. So within non-financial companies, for example, sustainability teams can talk to their finance departments and everyone understands what's being said and what the data means. Finally, the last point there, just social considerations. Again, another thing that I think there has really been a call for more standardized approaches and metrics in determining social impacts linked to nature. So I think that this is another area that over the coming years would really benefit from additional guidance. In terms of the steps themselves, so we presented the assess, measure, disclose, and act steps. Presented them in quite a linear fashion. I think there's recognition that this can be quite a cyclical process. So going through that assessment, working out what your priorities are, disclosing information on them, acting on them, and then going through the process again. I think also for the assess, measure, and disclose steps, what's been recognized is that actually that process can take quite a lot of time for non-financial companies and financial institutions. So it's just recognizing that we don't have the luxury of, in many cases, waiting to have the information disclosed before organizations are acting. So recognizing that they can act also before by investing in circular economy, basically clients that are recognized as being quite nature positive. I think in order to ensure kind of wider uptake of the framework and wider uptake within the TNFD, there was a notion of really providing that added value. So highlighting really good case studies, examples as to this organization has gone through, identified a risk, and these are the benefits that they've seen from disclosing that information. And then finally, just a recognition that there will be much more technical guidance. We've heard about it on the panel, but by sector, by commodity, by region, by type of finance, the way the process is to assess, measure, and disclose will likely require different data, different approaches, depending on the different sector, commodity, etc. So I think, hopefully, if Daan is still online, then we can hear from Daan, and I'll jump to his
Let's see,
slide.
can you see and hear me? Can anyone see and hear me? Yeah.
Yep, we can hear you loud and clear.
Excellent, that's the first check. So, hello everyone, thank you for the invitation. My name is Daan Schipper. I am the head of Sustainable Business Department within Rabobank, which we indeed, as mentioned, call SDG Transitions. And Rabobank is a Dutch bank with a global large footprint in food and agricultural sectors, mainly in South America and the US and Australia and New Zealand. And clearly, these food and agricultural sectors are affected by and are affecting topics such as biodiversity decrease, land deforestation, and land degradation. So these are obviously risks that need to be addressed, and we also believe that simultaneously more nature-inclusive business models can lead to opportunities for clients that are willing to make the transition to more sustainable food production. So both from the opportunity and from the risk side, Rabobank was very eager to join the TNFD development. We were part of the informal working group and are currently a task force member organization. So we were very happy that we were invited to test the first exploratory framework, which Andrew just elaborately discussed, in this case on the soy value chain, and having many traders and clients in South America as well. We have clients in this portfolio. We also have a long-standing partnership with WWF, and so we teamed up with them to evaluate the framework, where we said, obviously WWF has a lot of knowledge on nature biodiversity, and Rabobank itself more on the food and agricultural sectors and the banking perspective, and how to transform and apply such a framework in practice to make it operational. And at the same time, we received great guidance from Andrew, from the global Canopy colleagues, and from UNFFI. So what we've done at Rabobank, we've had 12 departments look at this framework and evaluate it, which included many business sides, business angles, but also the risk side, research, strategy departments, as well as our sustainability staff department. And the feedback that we received overall was that it was a framework with a very clear structure. Also the division of the data stacks into the pressures on nature, state of nature, and response to nature was seen as logical. And there was a clear link to physical and transition risks that we also see, of course, in the TCFD. So that made it very recognizable for a financial institution, as we are used to working with that. What we furthermore found was that tooling, and then specifically sector-specific, if possible, on nature-related risks would be more needed to clarify further, especially for people and colleagues who are not experts in nature, which many bankers still are, to further verify what we are dealing with. And at the same time, the large number of tools that's already out there and is being developed also requires a bit more advice and uniformity on how to make things more practical and how, as a bank, we can apply those. Generally speaking, we believe that the framework can benefit from more practical guidance with more operational descriptions and questions, because obviously organizations have to translate this internally to get practical tools and make their portfolio analysis. And at the same time, also the opportunity side may be enhanced with more practical suggestions and examples. But overall, Rabobank has been very enthusiastic and optimistic about developments, and we aim to remain actively involved. As mentioned here, Bas Buter, our Global Head of Sustainability, will chair Working Group 5 on pilot testing, and we will actively engage with clients to test that framework and to get more information, because we obviously see that this is the major topic on the horizon. So I'll leave it there and hand back to you, Andy.
Thank you, Daan. Just wait for the slides. Yeah, so great to obviously have Daan come on and talk about his experience in the project. So obviously the soy project still working with the likes of Rabobank and Daan, just to dig into a bit more detail about some of the challenges and opportunities that are faced specifically around the soy supply chains. In terms of kind of next steps and organizations getting involved in the TNFD, Tony said it in the panel discussion, but there is the TNFD Forum, currently has over 200 members. And this really is an opportunity for organizations to contribute to the mission of the TNFD task force. And effectively, it's an opportunity for your organizations to help shape the TNFD and really make sure that it works for you as well. In terms of next projects for Global Canopy, we'll be starting another TNFD-aligned pilot very soon, which will be focused on palm oil supply chains, and the testing for that with financial institutions, non-financial companies, will likely take place mid-February to April of next year. So kind of a call to organisations who are either investing in or working with palm oil supply chains to note that this particular pilot's going on. And again, as was discussed in the TNFD panel, there is this upcoming beta version of the official TNFD framework, and really that is an opportunity to once again test the beta version and provide feedback to the TNFD to make sure that it's fit for purpose. But that's everything from me, and thanks again to Daan for joining online. I don't know, one question maybe? Two, okay. Yeah, so at the back, I don't know if we have a microphone, do we?
Yeah, hi there. Thank you very much. My name is Bruce Fletcher. I'm the Chief Risk Officer at NatWest. I believe, Tony, that we're forum members, but you could probably confirm that. I'm told that by my team. My question really gets to the direction of travel here on sectors. I think the sector-specific bit is quite important. But I've got two questions. One is just around other pilots. I'd say farming is probably an important one, especially for places like Scotland and the UK. If you think about land use and the benefits and potential destructive effects of that, I think that'd be an interesting pilot to go down. It's a fair bit of a exposure on bank balance sheets as an example and big environmental impacts. I'd say secondly, just tying back to the earlier session into what you're talking about here around measures, and I think we're still struggling from a climate standpoint on measurements. I know it was referenced ISSB earlier, but I would say the more you can get, and I think the climate money is still lagging because of the lack of standards and definitions on what green is. I'd say if you can accelerate that in some way in any of your work here and link it in with climate, I think that would really get money into other kind of non-carbon related green type areas, and would be interested in your comments on those too.
Yeah, I mean, well, I'm sure Tony has some points on this as well, but I think the expectation is, yes, very much there will be a need to obviously have that climate-nature nexus explored within the TNFD, and that will be something that really future pilots need to start thinking about in greater detail. And yeah, I guess the answer to your question is completely agree. I think it's something that we need to be conscious of going forward.